The energy that it takes to bounce back is energy that we don't have kind of to spare when we're constantly doing it. If I asked you to, as fit as you are, if I asked you to just keep jumping up and down on the spot, over a period of time, your energy levels are going to go down. And using resilience as what good looks like in the face of uncertainty and disruption and challenge means that we're constantly bouncing. And that's not the way to move through it. The way to move through it is to understand that challenge is natural. There are going to be ups and downs. There's going to be discomfort, but then to engage with it with this open curiosity around, I might not be enjoying this, but where is the gold in this for me? How am I wiser, bigger, with a better understanding of myself, others, and the world as I come out of this experience? And as I am in it, I'm seeking that actively.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are just some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I am Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is a world leader in positive psychology, an organizational psychologist, honorary fellow at the University of Melbourne, and the author of the newly released book, The Leaders Ecosystem. Our guest's career has included roles at University of Melbourne, Melbourne Business School, the Michelle McQuaid Group, Centre for Workplace Excellence, and Geelong Grammar School. She has studied a BA Honours in Business Studies from the University of Bournemouth, Graduate Certificate in Change Management from the University of New South Wales Business School, and a PhD Organisational Behaviour and Development from the University of Melbourne. I'm excited to host a 6-time author, dynamic keynote speaker, and someone who is passionate about helping people lead exceptionally through complexity, uncertainty, and change. Dr. Paige Williams. Paige, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Craig. I'm really happy to be here with you. Looking forward to our conversation.
Beautiful. Now, you're currently there based in Melbourne, which is at the time of the recording, having a bit of a cold snap. But I'm curious, where did you grow up and what was the big dream as a young human being running around the playgrounds with your friends?
Yeah, so I'm originally from London. So I grew up in northwest London, kind of near Wembley Stadium. And I grew up in the 70s. So I was born in 71. And what I've come to realize is how much that really shaped what I thought a good life looked like. As a young female growing up in that time, my formative kind of young womanhood years were during the 1980s. And so I had aspirations to be in PR, to be in marketing. I was part of a generation of females that, you could have it all. You could be the career woman, you could be the perfect wife, you could be the ideal mum. And so I had big hopes and dreams, some of which came true, and others of which were hard won and I have good stories to tell around them, but all of which have shaped me and where I'm at right now.
Yeah. And would you consider yourself a natural leader or more of a follower during your teenage years?
Oh, no, I think I've always been a natural leader. So I was kind of school captain. I was, captain of the hockey team. I was an all-rounder at school. So I was academically, I did well, music, sport. So I was kind of one of those kids. And I was happy to take decisions. I'm someone who is happy to take action and learn along the way. And it's ironic now to think about some of the authoring that I've done since then. But I think, I've always been probably at the front rather than following, but very happy to follow. I have a saying that, if no one will lead, I will lead, but I don't have to.
Yeah, great. I like that. So if I was to go back and talk to your friends or your peers at school, maybe even your teachers, what sort of characteristics would they have seen in you that would enable you to be, in such leadership roles?
Oh, so, what's come to mind then is my school reports. And they used to be handwritten then, right? And you'd get them and take them home and read them. I'd read them through with my mum. And so a good sense of responsibility. If I was asked to do something, they knew it would be done and I would follow it through and it would be done well. That I was gregarious and outgoing. And there's an interesting journey I've had with that in terms of introversion and extroversion. And that I like my peers and my peers like me. And so I guess those are the kinds of things that meant that from a young age, I was happy to take on responsibility. I liked people, they liked me. And, in your school age years, that's pretty much all it takes to be a reasonable leader.
Yeah, and it's true. And, it's probably not as obvious as we grow older, but we still like to follow people we like. It's sort of ingrained in us as human beings.
I think that's so true. And I think because people we like, we generally trust as well. And we have faith that they have our best interests and the collective best interests at heart. And so, I think there's a lot to be said. I mean, what works in the playground, what works in primary school, perhaps we should just stick to those principles, huh?
Yeah. Make life a lot easier, wouldn't it?
It may well do.
Was there anyone who kind of stands out for you that were like key role models during this time that, that you kind of look up to or gave you mentorship or guidance through those years, or even when you're transitioning more into, young adult phase?
Yeah. So my mum is my kind of hero. My dad left our home when I was 10 and my brother was 13. And you got to realize, this was 1981. This was at a time when the divorce rate wasn't, 2 out of 3 marriages don't survive. This was certainly not the case for mum and for our family. And I can remember, I have such a strong memory of my first year in in secondary school, so age 11 in the UK, same as here, same as in Australia, standing in a queue waiting outside a classroom. And there were 30 kids, 30 children in that class. And there was me and one other boy that had separated parents. And I remember feeling how out of the social norm we had been kind of catapulted into. We were no longer the nuclear family. My mum's experience of it was that she was no longer welcome at kind of the couples that had card nights and that kind of thing. That was no longer part of her world. So she was ostracized as well. And, this is a woman who grew up, born in 1939, left school at 16 to work in a shoe shop, and now had a mortgage and 2 children, dependents. And, legally, we weren't in the same position then as it is now when parents separate. And so it was hard, and mum did it hard. And she parented us beautifully through those times. It was particularly challenging for my brother. He lost a role model in terms of a father. And she kind of had to manage his reaction to that. I went into good girl syndrome. At the age of 11, as I went into senior school, I kind of went head down, bum up, be a good girl, don't cause any more ripples because we got enough going on in our world. And, that was my tendency anyway, but there was certainly that dynamic going on. But to see my mum cope with all that she did, with the grace that she did and the resilience and the grittiness before we had those terms as kind of things that we aspire to or things that were everyday kind of language. She is absolutely someone who has been with me and inspired me throughout my life.
Yeah, obviously a real challenging adversity at that age, but always comes opportunity from adversity. And obviously your mum, in the way she approached it, sounds like she did a beautiful job. And So those lessons you can learn off that situation, I'm sure have really, really helped you throughout your career, through those times that get a bit challenging, where you can kind of lean on what you learned during those times, even though you probably weren't aware of them when you were 10 years old.
Yeah, I mean, the irony of it is, Craig, that the first book I authored was Becoming Anti-Fragile, Learning to Thrive Through Disruption, Challenge and Change. And it's one of the essays in the ecosystem book. It speaks to how do we do that, and how do we move beyond resilience. And, you know, the irony of my lived experience, the irony of my expertise is that I went through that, and I know that I'm better from that experience. Like, I reflect on it now and know that our family was more cohesive without my dad as part of it. I know that the parenting that Mum was able to do without his influence was better for both myself and my brother Paul. So I can see as a family unit how we were better coming out of that adversity than we were coming into it, but also personally as well, because the role modeling that I have from Mum, and seeing her without the opportunity that I've had in life. She was in a children's home. She was one of 13. She didn't have a stable family, and yet she was able to create a stable family environment for my brother and I. And yeah, there's no doubt the learnings and the inspiration that have come from that have helped me through some challenging times.
So you talked about beyond resilience there. Now, I'd like to dive into that a bit, because there's so much talk about resilience right now. I remember when it first started becoming part of the vernacular, I'm like, why is everyone so focused on this whole resilience thing? And I think for me, I grew up in, my nearest neighbor was a mile away. I went to a school that only had 7 people when I left. It started with 28, from 5 to the ages of 12. So there was so many lessons in that on its own.
Yeah.
But going through sport and playing so much sport as both an individual and a team, and where some of those sports we were losing often, and other sports where we were winning every single time. And so resilience was kind of just a normal part of what I did. And, I had some medical issues along the way. So I was kind of like, why has this become such a big focus when everyone goes through things in life and they naturally have a level of resilience already? Why do we see it so much being such a focus and bring it to the forefront in our workplaces? And so I'm curious for you, why you think it has really become more of the vernacular. Is that people haven't put themselves in positions where they can, have micro doses of stress to build that resilience? What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination of things, as is often the answer, right? I think one thing that's changed since we, because you're right, and beautiful research of George Bernardo shows that we have an inherent level of resilience. So it's not that we don't come into the world with the capacity to bounce back, because we know that life is going to have its ups and downs, and we're designed for that purpose, right? But what's changed is that the nature, the complexity, the speed, and the scale of that challenge has accelerated so much. And what's happened is the gap between our internal world and our capacity to bounce back and be resilient, and what's happening in our external environment, they're kind of now out of whack. And so what's being asked of us at a more constant rate, at a bigger scale, and with more complexity, is now ongoing. It's now an inherent part of our worlds, both at home and at work. So it's not even that you can say, okay, it's just at work and I come home and I can put all that down. Things like social media connectedness means that we're exposed to things that, like my mum's generation wasn't, because we've now got the technology to be exposed to it. So there's this term out of the military, I'm sure you've heard of it, Craig, VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, VUCA. And I've heard recently they've now added another A for accelerating. And that used to be a term that was pretty much used for kind of military type environments, but now it's expanded into the workplace. And I would argue that it's everywhere. Like, we just live in a VUCA world now. And so resilience just isn't enough when there's been that much change in the speed and complexity of the challenges around us. We're being asked for so much more in terms of responding to what's going on.
Is it that obviously, yes, we're seeing things happening faster, there's potentially more uncertainty because of the speed of change, complexity in maybe what's coming at us every single day and what's around us because of technology, right? It's not as simple as, I walked along the road to school today, or I got in a car and I went from A to B. Now we've got social media, so we've got messaging hitting us from all sorts of places and the noise increases. So in regards to resilience, because I haven't really heard too many people be able to explain well in how, one, do we cope with repeated challenges that come at us and build that resilience? So how do we actually build the resilience? So what do we need to put in place to build it? But secondly, to go with it, right? You can't just build resilience by facing lots of things. You've also got to have the coping skills, which in a way is like to not take things so damn seriously.
Yeah, I so agree with you there, Craig. We need to hold life lightly because that's what helps us kind of move through it in an agile way. But, hence the title of the essay is Beyond Resilience, and the title of the book is Becoming Antifragile, because resilience just isn't fit for purpose anymore. That's the whole thing. The metaphor I often use is certainly when I was growing up in the UK, we had those phones where you stick your finger in and you dial it round, and then you watch it go back, and then you stick your finger in for the next number. It's like kind of mindfulness before mindfulness was a thing. And the speed with which we do that, it's not fit for purpose when you think about how an iPhone works today, right? And to try and use one of those dial phones, and you're just like, that would be crazy. And in a way, resilience is the same kind of not fit for purpose given the changes that have taken place in our context, which is where the idea of anti-fragile comes in, because rather than us engage, kind of feeling the impact and being impacted by the challenge, which is completely natural, and we kind of get impacted, pushed back, and we bounce back from that. And then kind of there's apparently a gap, and then something else happens and we get impacted and we bounce back from that. That just isn't the case anymore. That it's just constant. It's not episodes of challenge. And so we need to almost, I use this phrase, it's the tiny traumas of everyday life. It's like the paper cuts you get, and we need to be able to engage with them differently so that there isn't a big thing of having to bounce, be impacted, bounce back, and then come forward again. And this is the anti-fragile. How is it that even as we experience those things, maybe we're really uncomfortable with them, we actually hold this possibility that as we're struggling through this, there's a way for us to be better coming out of it than we were coming into it. And so the anti-fragility aspect, and it's the original work of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he looked at it in terms of economic systems and socio-political systems. His background was a stock trader, so he'd kind of seen how this phenomenon of things improving through disruption, improving through uncertainty. And I love that idea. And I was like, okay, so this is what's beyond resilience. This is what helps us navigate the complexity and speed of our world and actually become better through the experience rather than burning out through it.
Yeah, it's as though a lot of people are in a car and they're sitting above the red line the entire day rather than, taking a break and, maybe just driving it once every couple of days, so to speak. And so it's just, like any car, high performance car, it's going to, if you keep revving it too high, it's going to explode. And that's potentially why we're seeing a lot more cases of, stress and burnout and overwhelm, and the list goes on.
It absolutely is, because the energy that it takes to bounce back is energy that we don't have kind of to spare when we're constantly doing it. If I asked you to, as fit as you are, if I asked you to just keep jumping up and down on the spot, over a period of time, your energy levels are going to go down. And using resilience as what good looks like in the face of uncertainty and disruption and challenge means that we're constantly bouncing. And that's not the way to move through it. The way to move through it is to understand that challenge is natural. There are going to be ups and downs. There's going to be discomfort, but then to engage with it with this open curiosity around, I might not be enjoying this, but where is the gold in this for me? How am I wiser, bigger, with a better understanding of myself, others, and the world as I come out of this experience. And as I am in it, I'm seeking that actively.
Yeah. Look, many humans, when they're in uncertainty, when they experience overwhelm, when they look at complexity, when they are being stressed and challenged a lot, they tend to go into their own internal world and try and control as whatever they can control. When we look at high-performing people and high-performing teams, when that starts to happen, they actually reach out and go and look to the support of other people. And I think sometimes those, so it's interesting when, and I don't know why, but I keep going back to sport analogies right now. It's quite often when you see someone who's a company will hire a top athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a difference between hiring an individual athlete versus someone in a team who's come from a team sport. The individual will very much control the environment. So when stuff gets challenging, they know what to do. They'll go into control and they'll block everyone. Whereas the person who comes from the team environment will generally know that, you know what, it's going to be okay because I might be having not such a good day, but there'll be other people that will lift it up. So how do I leverage those people? And look, that's generalizing because there will be some great individuals that can also expand and use other people. But it's interesting that in those situations that many people will go in chiller.
Yeah.
But we know when things get challenging, we've got to open up. And, whether it's vulnerability to say, hey, I need some help, or it's just that ability to let the ego drop a little bit and go, you know what, there might be other people who know more in the situation. What have you found in your research around this when in these times, in these VUCA times, where we need to lean on other people?
Yeah, absolutely. And so in the ecosystem, I talk about how team antifragility is a superpower, right? Because we know that collectives are more anti-fragile than individuals. And for some of the reasons you've just mentioned, right? There might be energy elsewhere that we can draw on when our energy levels are low. There might be wisdom and perspective that we can draw on because we're just not seeing the full picture, or we are not being effective in our thinking because we are too internalized. We've got kind of what I call spaghetti brain going on. So this idea that we are better together is an inherent part of anti-fragile. It's not a solo endeavor. And the critical thing about creating anti-fragile teams is, as you've alluded to, creating the psychological safety for us to go, hey, my energy's low today. Hey, I'm not sure I've got an answer for this. Hey, can we solve this together? Because if we haven't got that safety, we can't harness the leverage of being better together. We can't harness the anti-fragile possibility of the group.
So being better together requires trust.
Yep.
And to build trust, we've first got to, create that safe space for people to feel welcome, to feel seen, heard, that they matter in a way. And so I know, just talking to you before, you were doing a session before we came on with a team of leaders around building psychological safety. Now, it's a word that is quite common now in the vernacular of corporate and even outside of that. But I'm not sure everyone really knows what psychological safety is. They go, yep, psychological safety, but what is it and how do you actually build it?
Yeah. So look, originally it's the work of Dr. Amy Edmondson, so Dr. Amy Edmondson is the most famous researcher around it, but actually Warren Bennis and Peter Senge originally did the work about 15 years before that, but Amy has popularized it and her research is excellent around it. And look, and in a very kind of applied way, what does psychological safety mean? It means that you feel okay to be vulnerable. You're willing to take an emotional and psychological risk with another. But in the work that I've done with my colleague, Dr. Michelle McQuaid, we've looked at the legislation that has recently come in around how do we create psychosocial safety at work. And it's now a requirement for organizations to do this. And this legislation states it's actually the role of leaders to make sure it exists with teams. So what does this mean? Well, it means that I feel psychologically safe, I feel socially safe, I feel emotionally safe with whatever I am feeling in this moment. So psychological safety, I reckon it comes down to 5 things. And I write about this in the Better Together essay in the ecosystem. And I reckon it's about, do I feel safe to shine in my strengths? Is it okay for me to be good at stuff in our team? Or is there kind of a tall poppy syndrome? Do I have to stoop in order to fit in here? Is it safe for me to stuff up, slip up, and learn? So it's not advocating that we can keep getting things wrong, but is it okay to say, or I'm not sure this is going to meet the deadline, or I've done this right, or that conversation with the client didn't go well, or do I not feel safe enough to acknowledge that? Is it okay for me to acknowledge a bit my weaknesses, to kind of go, I'm not very good at this, I could do with some support, or is there someone else that can do this for whom it is a strength?
Yeah.
So we've got stuff up, slip up, and learn. Am I okay to shine in my strengths? Am I okay to acknowledge my weaknesses? Am I okay to be authentically me? So that means, it speaks to our diversity and inclusion agenda. Is it okay to bring all of myself into this workplace? Or is there some of me that I have to leave in the car park, or leave at home each day? Because if I bring all of myself, it's too much of a risk. I won't be allowed in. And then the final one is it okay for me to have ambition beyond where I am now? So is it all right for me to want to grow beyond this role, this team, this organization, or is that not okay? So I reckon those 5, they create what I call a safety star, and they allow us to have conversations and to think about, where are we at in this team? What's our team culture? And how safe do we feel with each other?
Great. I love that. I love the depth and breadth, what you're going with here. And, there's so many things we can unpack here, the tall poppy syndrome versus, and the ability to stand out. What happens if I put my neck up, as they're going to get chopped off, so to speak, from the chickens. But those, even to be, is it okay to be acknowledged for my weaknesses? A lot of people will shy away from, or not so much weaknesses, but maybe errors or mistakes they've made. And so it's interesting because you've got to balance that ability to show, a bit of vulnerability. But if you expose too much and there's not enough of showing you shining, then it's going to look like you're not good enough for the job that you're doing, or that you're not good enough for the team. You're not meeting the expectations. So it's a really fine balance for people to try and sit in that space of being acknowledged for what they're doing well, be acknowledged for things they're not doing so well, but really try and get that right. So the overall picture of someone is more positive than potentially negative if the wrong things are shining through.
I think it's really interesting because what sits underneath all of this is an acceptance and acknowledgement that we're all perfectly imperfect. And actually kind of going, so we're all going to have strengths. We're all going to stuff up and slip up at some time. We're all going to have weaknesses, right? And so if that is acknowledged as this is true for all of us, then having the right balance of conversation is around actually thinking about, if we are better together, if we are more anti-fragile together, how is it that an understanding of our strengths means that we can create a constellation of strengths that means that our weaknesses become irrelevant because your strengths are my weaknesses. And so when we interconnect on the basis of strengths, we're able to do everything that needs to be done. And if we're not, and if, I hear your listeners might be going, but that's a nice idea, Paige, but what happens if not every gap is filled with someone else's strengths? That's fine. We have the right conversation about, okay, so what's our best strategy to fill this gap, to meet this need, to lift our performance here, knowing that it's going to take maybe more time, more determination, more energy, because we're not playing to the natural strengths that we have available to us. And hey, here's another idea. Maybe we seek collective wisdom outside of our team, or we seek expertise and strengths outside of our team. So the idea of a strengths constellation and using strengths to fill gaps doesn't have to just stay within the team. Maybe we explore connections and strategic alliances outside of the team, and that might be the way to go. But this idea that actually we're all perfectly imperfect, stuffing up is completely normal, and let's talk about it early, get the learning from it. So talk about it early so it doesn't get bigger than it needs to and come and kind of is, even harder to deal with down the track. And let's get the learning from it. So we have the right conversation around, all right, what went well? Where did we struggle? What can we learn from this? And what are we going to do differently next time as a result? Because we certainly don't want to be going through the same kind of failure slip-up cycles again and again and again.
Yeah, great. Right. And so when it comes to the environment, right, of having that psychological safety, that's part of culture. The way we work together is part of culture. So in the research that you've done or experience that you have, when you look at cultures, to ensure we have a really strong culture, where do we need to start?
Without a doubt, and this shows in the research, but also in my lived experience as a leader and working with leaders in organization, it starts with leaders role modeling, right? And so, that simple thing of don't ask others to do what you're not prepared to demonstrate yourself. It doesn't mean you have to do it in exactly the same way because we all have different roles. But if you are wanting people to be compassionate, if you are wanting people to be accountable, the first thing we need to do is role model that. Now, I want to say, when I say leader, I reckon we're all leaders. We all lead ourselves. We all have a chance to be a leader in our team. And then there are people in formal leadership roles. So each of us has the opportunity, and there is an invitation for us to role model what we would like to see more of in our team. And those informal leadership roles, it's even more important that they do it because it sends a signal around, this is what's important around here. This is what good looks like. And it makes the conversation around setting an expectation for others to do the same much easier to have.
I think a huge part of, role modeling too is that ability is really understanding not only what you role model, but also the behaviors that you either address or don't address inside an organization, or those things that happen. Because yes, you might be role modeling something in the way you deliver something, but it might be those moments where you do nothing that can really shift a culture inside an organization, have quite a profound effect.
Absolutely. You're so right, Craig. It's as much about what you do, but equally and perhaps sometimes more powerfully, it's about what is not okay and calling that out and nipping that in the bud early. Because otherwise they just balance each other out, or in the worst case scenario, you might be doing everything, but because you got blinkers on and other things are happening that you're not then addressing, they actually then outweigh the role modeling that you're showing. So as a leader, it's about setting the example and then inviting accountability around others following that example in their roles.
Now, and I think, it's interesting, a lot of human beings like to avoid conflict. They're fearing of something, but I know the number one request that we're getting right now is around navigating difficult conversations. How do we address difficult situations? And it is an integral part of culture, that ability to speak up. And if and you see a lot of leaders who are uncomfortable in this situation. Now, we talked about psychological safety, which is great, but there's a key component of, yes, there's a nice space, but there's also a feeling of permission, which was intertwined with psychological safety, that feeling of, I have permission to do something. But when it comes to addressing those challenging questions, challenging situations, how can we create a better environment for that? Because it's easy to say create a psychological space, but it's more than that. Like, how do we specifically set up so that people can and not only have those conversations, but also know, actually, we'll keep it at that. I'm going to make this too complex. So let's keep it. How do we create the space for people to feel like they can actually go into those, knowing it's going to be uncomfortable, but they're still willing to do it?
So I think the first thing is to acknowledge that perhaps where we are at now and where we've been in the past is not ideal. And so I think what we've got to stop doing is pretending that everything's okay, and invite conversations and be prepared to listen to what people are saying. And we might not find that comfortable. It might not be what we want to hear. And yet this is the way that we start the journey with psychological safety. In my work around accountability, and I reckon I am passionate about accountability. There aren't many people that I meet that go, oh yeah, I really want to talk about accountability. But I think it's such a cornerstone to how we clean up the idea of difficult and challenging conversations, because at the crux of accountability conversations, and I reckon this is at the crux of workplaces, if I'm honest, are two things. The first is clarity of expectations. And that can be to do with your job role, but equally it can be to do with what's the psychological contract of our relationship? Are we clear of what's okay and what's not okay? Are we clear on the boundaries of where we can go in this relationship with each other? And I'm talking about in a workplace, but equally it can be, am I clear on the expectations of my role, of my responsibilities? And the second thing is fruitful accountability relationships. So the quality of relationships and basically the answers to those 5 safety questions. So when we think about how do we build a consistent yes to those 5 safety questions, kind of one of the hygiene factors is to get super clear on what are the expectations that we have of each other. And they can be to do with culture, because when you think about what culture is, they are a set of values that have been normalized and are embedded in the norms of the way we work together, and that we are prepared to be accountable to. And so these conversations around what are the expectations and how are we going with them, they're at the crux of these challenging conversations that leaders often feel that they need to have and feel uncomfortable having. And why do they feel uncomfortable having them? Often it's because they haven't set clear expectations in the first place.
Very good. Very good. And I think that's for individuals as well. Sometimes we always look for other people for accountability, but it starts with us. We've got to look at ourselves. And I think not only do you need clear directions or clarity from leaders or managers or other people, but we also need clear directions for ourselves or objectives. What are we trying to achieve here, or what do we value as appropriate in these situations? So it starts with us.
Absolutely does. And so there's the part of the ecosystem is an essay around accountability, and the central question for that is what's mine to own. So before we start engaging in conversations with others, have we made clear what our personal boundaries are, what's okay and not okay for us? Or in the case of a workplace, what the key expectations were of this role or team or project? Have we communicated that clearly and checked for understanding and agreement? And then have we provided support and invited feedback as that work has started to get into flow? And if we haven't, and I'm quite fierce with this with leaders as I help them and help their teams understand how to do accountability better, is if you haven't done that, you really don't have the right to go into an accountability conversation that is saying, why haven't you done? Because you haven't made clear what good looks like. And you haven't shared that and got feedback on that. Once you've done that, you've got some solid ground to work on. And so this is where I acknowledge, Craig, that sometimes those opening conversations around going, do you know what? We've got to get some hygiene factors in here first. So let's acknowledge we're not where we need to be and be open and curious about how we can get there so that moving forward, we've got some solid ground to work from.
Okay, great. Now, as a lot of people ask me, what is the, as a leader, as being a high-performing coach, and I've shared this a couple of times in the podcast as well, what is my number one role in those situations? And every time, without a doubt, and I've always said this from quite a young age, is that my number one role is more than 50% of my time is care. And when it comes to, from a leader's perspective, we're talking about the leaders ecosystem here is around, from a leadership perspective, where does care start and stop when it comes to being a leader? How far do we go, right? So how far do we go into the personal? How much do we stay inside the actual the workplace in regards to care for people?
Yeah. So I wrote a blog once, and it was called "How to Lead with Love Without It Getting Weird."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what we're speaking to here. And this idea of showing care is something that is, so all kinds of things are going through my head at the moment. So a piece of research from the US Army around what made leaders followable. And in that kind of high pressure, high performing environment, it was their capacity to love and be loved, their capacity to show that they cared for their people. And as we opened with that, Craig, didn't we? You know, we follow people that we like, that we trust, and that we feel will kind of have our backs when, you know, stuff happens. And so this idea of care, and in my work, we use care as an acronym. And so we break it down to mean compassion, appreciation, responsibility, and emotional wisdom. And so by kind of taking that umbrella term of, well, how can we do it? It means compassion is understanding that perfectly imperfect nature of each of us, and giving people, holding space for people to bump around up against the edges of their kind of humanness, and be okay with that, and then help them move through that into, you know, a better place and better performance. Appreciation means that we're acknowledging strengths, we're seeing strengths in people, we are recognizing good work when it's done and giving that feedback just as much as we are the gap-filling feedback, right? Because when we tell people what we see and appreciate about them, it's acknowledging to them that they have a contribution to make, and it's saying, we want more of this. Please share more of this with us. Responsibility speaks to the accountability piece. It's not that all of this happens in a kind of fluffy way. It's that we are very clear with people what the ask is of them, and we have expectations that we want them to deliver. And the emotional wisdom is asking that question, how are you feeling? How do you feel about that? Understanding that emotions aren't something that need to be kept out of the workplace. They're actually a really important feedback loop for us individually and collectively around how are we going with this? So this idea of being able to care without it kind of getting weird is absolutely about understanding that we each have a deep need to feel seen, respected, and appreciated. And if we love and care through that lens, then it's very unlikely that it's going to go into the weird space.
Yeah, it just reminds me of, I'm aware of a cafe chain in America, and when you walk into there and you order your food, and once you've paid and, you know, it's saying goodbye, the last thing they say is, I love you. And right, so that's kind of, it just makes me, it's kind of off this a little bit, but it kind of makes me laugh because it's right on that balance of care and feeling a bit weird for the person receiving. It would just, just interesting.
Yeah, this is the other thing is, you know, the word love is kind of got all kinds of tendrils associated with it, depending on what our individual lived experience has been of love in all its different flavors and ways, shapes and form. And also, it really hasn't been something that's been allowed in the workplace. There's quite a gendered story around both love and care, in that they've been kind of women's business and women's business outside of the workplace. And you know, when you think about even the role of leaders up until fairly recently, and look, there's some argument to say, it's a strong argument to say it's still the case, leadership has been a male bastion, right? So when you kind of understand where love and care has been kept in our social understanding of it, it's not surprising that it kind of feels a bit orcs to have it in the workplace. And equally on the other side of that is, yes, men have been traditionally kind of leaders in work roles, and they haven't been the main caregivers at home either. So there's this real kind of no-win situation where women have not been empowered to be leaders in the workplace, men have not been empowered to access the love and care that's very natural to all of us, regardless of gender. And we're left with this, quite frankly, pretty shitty situation where workplaces don't have a natural easiness with care and love. And yet, fundamentally, it's the currency of human connection. And so, yeah, love as strategic advantage is the essay that I write in the ecosystem. And it certainly with our millennial generations and our younger generations, it's going to be something that really accesses their motivation, their commitment, their conviction about how to make a difference in their work.
Yeah, I feel my dad mastered the art of saying, I love you without saying, I love you.
Yeah, words are not enough.
That's right. He never said, I love you, and that's okay. But I knew he cared and loved me the whole way through. It shone through without those words. And so it's interesting how you show something versus getting caught up on the actual word in itself. In regards to a lot of leaders, they'll find themselves in roles or in leadership positions, by accident quite often, not by training, but purely by they've been very good at doing something else. And so they find themselves in these situations. And for many, they just try, and then they try and figure their way through it. It can be a little bit lonely. They're trying to do what they perceive everyone else wants. I mean, not all of them in this case, but many will do this. And so they seem to lose themselves a little bit when people go into title leadership roles, in a way, but an actual title. So how can we ensure people when they're moving in, potentially into new roles of leadership, whatever that may be in life or inside the corporate world, what can help them ensure that they stay true to themselves and who they are?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question, Craig. Thanks so much. Because, time and time again, as I've worked in organizations, there's a very regular scenario where people with technical expertise are promoted until then they're in a human leadership role. And so their technical expertise has got them up to a level where they're actually removed from their technical need and their technical influence and power base to now needing to lead humans. And it's very, very different and can be very disorientating because their solid ground of influence, their solid ground of kind of identity can be really shaken at that time. And often those first few months, years of kind of people leadership roles can be pretty lumpy, bumpy. And that's where what you're speaking to in terms of where is our solid ground and where is, what do we anchor ourselves to as we kind of move through these key transition points. And in the ecosystem, I speak to this around finding your true you. And this is where rather than finding a reference point externally, which is where you talk to, I'm going to try and be like that leader over there, or I'm going to do it that way, I'm going to run my meeting like that person did. There can be some useful information from that kind of thinking, but actually the person that we need to most connect to is ourselves, and we're not going to do that by using external reference points. And yet one of the challenges with our VUCA world is that less and less connection happens internally and with ourselves. And it's qualitatively different than connecting in with that spaghetti brain that I was talking earlier, what's sometimes called our monkey mind. Mm-hmm. We have an internal narrative and it's our sense-making kind of narrative around what's going on. And it's like having a continual commentator on life in your brain. And they'll be going, oh, look at that, and blah, 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 and so-and-so did that, and what do they mean by that? And, oh, look at that, and don't like those socks, and why did she change her hair? And that fringe is awful, and whatever else it might be that's going on, right? So it's not dialing into that because that's there in anything. It's actually kind of pushing that to the background. And there is a quieter voice because that voice there is our socialized self. It's our self that is meeting the needs that we perceive society is asking of us, and trying to judge how we can do that in the best way possible. There's another quieter voice in each of us that is kind of our trueness. And I reckon that's the thing to locate to when we're in these moments of transition, which can be as a new leader. and to really anchor yourself in the quiet voice. But to do that, we got to turn down the socialized self and get comfortable with sitting in the space of being who we know ourselves to be true. And there are a number of ways we can do that. But I'm interested, Craig, what are some of the ways that you connect to your truth? Because as a high-performance athlete, I'm sure you've had to do this.
Yeah, look, a lot of strategies along the way. I'll take Ironman, for instance, is where, you can be racing anywhere between 8 and 17 hours constantly in one day. And so during that time, there's a lot to take in. And, you've got, you're swimming, for those who don't know, 3.8 kilometers, you are cycling 180 kilometers, and you are running a full marathon, so 42.2 kilometers. And there's no breaks. You're just continually going, and you're not on your own. You've got a whole lot of people around you. So there's, when you're in the water, you're dealing with maybe waves or currents, and up to 2,500, 3,000 people in the water at the same time. You're maybe sunlight, maybe wind, maybe cold, maybe heat. But then when you come out, you've got a whole lot of spectators, and you've got expectations on yourself and all the sacrifices you have made to be there. You're then cycling on roads. So you're looking out for potholes, for making sure you're not getting too close to someone and getting busted for drafting, which is where you're inside a certain amount of meters from someone and you're not allowed to do that. How much do I eat? Am I eating at the right time? I can see lots of trees. Oh, there's a pretty house. There's a beautiful lake. There's a nice castle on the hill. What am I going to do next week? And so you have to be able to quieten that voice down at all times. And for me, it was always a 3-word mantra of let it go. It was just very simple, let it go. And it was, in what I talk, when I talk about pressure, it is, creating that pressure shield where literally you're just reducing all the different voices or all the different stimuli that can come at you in a single moment. Yeah. And when I think about it, in those times, we're so attuned to what's going on. It's one specific day, one specific time. So you are hyper alert of everything. But on a day-to-day basis, we're dealing with more information than probably what I was in that single moment of endurance performance. Yeah. Yes, you're using more than just your mental brain, and there's a lot of physical things that you've got to try and conserve to get through that really, really long day. And I think in life, we take on too much. We allow too much to come through, and there's that constant chatter around, what does someone perceive of me? Am I living up to someone else's expectations? And you just made me think then, like I live in a world which is very high performance still, where I'm working with lots of professional speakers and facilitators and coaches. And, at times we're facilitating and working together. And, a lot of the drive is making sure we're there for the participants, and we're literally looking through the lens of what's holding you back and how can I help. But then there's these other voices going on around, I need to raise my game because I've got other people in the room who expect high things of us. And so sometimes you can get caught, and it's just a matter of bringing yourself back to that moment and reducing as much stimuli as possible, and kind of moving into this space where my dad always said it, so it's very, very fresh in my mind, and that it was, you need to move from making it happen to let it happen. Yeah. And in many cases in corporate, from what I've observed, is people are trying to perform 98% of the time, and they do very little planning, preparing, debriefing, and letting it go, so to speak. Yeah. In sport, we're the complete opposite in most cases. Not in every sport. If you play baseball, bit different story, because you're playing 150, 170 games a year, whatever they play in Major League Baseball. So it might be a bit different. But in most cases, you are spending most of your time in that planning, preparation, preparedness, where a lot of it is making sure you reduce the extra energy and thoughts that you don't need, so you can stay fully present and use your energy at the right time. Otherwise, we won't be able to go to that next level in performance. So,
and that's exactly right. And this is what the connecting to the true you is about. It's about letting go. Mm. It's about letting go of the socialized self and the expectations that we perceive others have, and connecting into what we know to be true of ourselves. And what I found really interesting as I kind of did more research around this for the ecosystem essay was that this isn't just about what we might think is right for us, because that's often our socialized brain. So you might think about taking on a new leadership role and go, oh, this should be great. I should be really happy about this. But happy is not the same as true. And we'll know this because when we have that thought around taking the promotion or moving role, if we sit with it beyond what's the socialized self seeing the currency of this being, to actually noticing how are we physically responding as we have that? Have we got a sinking in our stomach? Is there a tension that our body is responding to? And how are we feeling emotionally? So that tapping into how do we feel about that, and actually putting some names to the emotions. Is it excitement? Is it anticipation? Is it hope? Is it possibility? Or is it actually dread? So what are we feeling as we think about that opportunity? And so it's not that there is just what we think. That's only part of the picture. When we're accessing true you, it's this quiet voice that actually is more powerful and has more resonance in our whole system. It's a thinking, feeling, being, sensing experience. And when we tune into that and we lead from that space, our leadership is far more potent.
Beautiful. Now, I'm not sure if I've seen any successful person in the world ever do it on their own. They've always got people surrounding them. I had an opportunity to be in New Zealand's most successful sports team that went 272 games unbeaten, and it's potentially a world record. We haven't been able to find anyone else that's been able to do more than that. And in that team, and what I've noticed with other really successful over a long period of time teams, is that they always have more than one leader. Yes, they might have a captain, they might have a coach, and they might have even co-captains, but internally inside that group of people are multiple leaders, and they know what their role is at a specific time. They know when to lead and when to follow. And so how important is it for people to think about who they can partner with to in those right moments to lead really effectively? Because to me, some of the best examples I've seen is when companies have co-CEOs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so this idea of reimagining leadership, I reckon, so we know that, leadership grew up in a military environment and command and control, and we know that that's not working anymore. And yet, whilst so ask and invite, which we could say is the opposite of command and control or tell and control. Neither one of those are the answer for everything, right? Because it's changing, it's complex, as we've already talked about. But what I reckon is an answer for everything is this idea of partnering. Because when we lead from an energy of doing two, we're in that tell and control.
Yeah.
When we lead from an energy of doing four, we're kind of disempowering. We're saying, I don't reckon you've got what it takes to do what we need done in this moment. Neither one of those is us harnessing the collective wisdom that we've talked about and really partnering with our people. Now, whether that's co-CEOs, so that we're, there's an ideal example of a strengths constellation where I'm sure, they bring different things, and collectively we get more capacity, perspective, more leadership out of that. And this is the thing, beautiful idea that we expand power when we power with people. And whether that's leaders to leaders, leaders with their teams, team members together, it's this idea of I don't need to power over you. I can power with you, and we expand the capacity, the leadership capacity available by doing that. So this idea of partnering and withing is such a crucial part of, again, what we need going forward, because no one person is going to have all the answers. And us partnering with people means that we're going to grow the capacity and the power base from which we can do the work that needs to be done.
Beautiful. Now, we look at some leaders and we go, wow, you just make that look so easy. It looks so free, etc. And so what does it take to go to that next level of leadership where you are leading with a freedom, so to speak?
Yeah.
Where when people observe you, we just go, wow, that list looks so effortless?
Yeah. So I've thought about this a lot because I've experienced people like that. I've had experiences of moments and where I felt like I'm in that space. And in thinking about this, as I wrote the ecosystem, it came to me that it's this thing between being deeply committed to the work, deeply committed to outcomes, deeply committed to being the best leader we can be, and whatever that might look like, and completely unattached to needing it to be any one way. And so I reckon those leaders that make it look effortless, they are deeply committed to the work that needs to be done, and they're unattached to it needing to be done their way or a prescriptive way. And because of that, they're holding this beautiful big space where everyone has a chance, everyone that it's appropriate has an opportunity to shape how this moves forward. And I reckon that deeply committed, completely unattached, keeps us out of ego. It keeps us holding the big enough space for others to join us in the work that needs to be done together. And it helps us move things forward and keep making progress. And it's big enough for us to change direction, which we're going to need to do because we know that things are complex and changing more quickly.
Yeah. If someone was to ask you what the leader ecosystem was in one sentence, how would you encapsulate what the leader ecosystem is?
The leader's ecosystem is everything you need and nothing you don't to lead exceptionally.
Oh, I like that. Very, very good. Nice wrap there. Now, we all know smart people have great answers, but the most successful people ask great questions.
Yes, they do.
When was the last time you did something for the first time?
Oh, I was thinking about this, and I went along and did a salsa class for the first time just a few weeks ago. My partner and I have been talking about taking dancing lessons together, and we've been talking about it for at least a couple of years. And we actually did it a few weeks ago. I had the best time. Not the most graceful on the floor, but had the most fun, I reckon.
Yeah, but who's judging?
Exactly.
What is the one question that you would love to solve?
I would love to solve the question, how do we get out of our own way? Because when I think about what I see most often is in the way of all the people I work with, it's generally themselves. And what's lovely about that question is there are as many different answers as there are people for which I might be asking it.
Nice interpretation. For you, what is an inspiring great leader, and who is a great example of this for you?
An inspiring leader is someone who is sure enough of themselves to be clear about what needs to happen, but big enough to allow others to shine bright as that work happens.
Good.
And so it speaks to deeply committed, completely unattached. And I'll lead if we need to lead, but I don't need to lead. And a beautiful example of that, well, I'm not even going to say one example. I work a lot with school leaders, and they are often great examples of that because they are leading a community where their role is to help others shine, but that community needs to know a clear direction in which they're moving. So, yeah, that's a great set of leaders that I look up to.
This has been one of my favorite podcasts, Paige. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our podcast listeners have as well. How can people learn more about what you do, and what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Oh, thanks so much, Craig. So my website is drpaige.au, and on there you'll find lots of information about keynote speaking and writing and ways to connect into our community. I also have there the hub, which is where I put the latest thought leadership that I'm inspired by or that I've put out into the world. And you can connect with me via that site.
We'll put all those links in the show notes for our listeners to find them nice and easily. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, Paige. A beautiful journey from those early days in England and East London, is that correct?
Yeah, North London.
From North London, and to the adversity that you were managing as a young teenager at the age of 10, to how that's helped kind of shape the way you think about the world, the way that you, the role model that your mum provided you, into now how you really support humanity in a way around how can we be more effective in the way that we lead our teams to not only perform better, but allow people to be better human beings. I love the leader ecosystem as we're going through kind of the entire ecosystem in a way. I think we pretty much covered most parts today. Was just that real sense of this is common sense. This makes a lot of sense. And you articulate things really, really well. Some people talk about the abstract and the macro of it, but to actually narrow it down into bite-sized, easy chunks that we can catch and understand and go, you know what? I can use that. So I feel this is a really valuable conversation that people will take a lot from. And my encouragement is to grab a copy of the Leader Ecosystem, check it out, learn a lot more, because Paige, you're a wonderful human being and I've loved this conversation and look forward to continuing it in the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. You've done an amazing job navigating the ecosystem, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.